So welcome to our revision session. We're looking into a very important topic, which is a GNC asked question. Okay, so we're looking into production and flow of cerebral spinal fluid. Okay, so outline. So you should be able to draw a well-labeled diagram of the meninges showing the flow of CSF. You should be able to draw a diagram showing the structures of the meninges. You should be able to outline the function of cerebral spinal fluids in the meninges. You should be able to explain the production and flow of cerebral spinal fluid. So in our introduction, we're going to explain what cerebral spinal fluid is. So cerebral spinal fluid, this is a clear, colorless fluid that protects the brain and the spinal cords from chemical and physical injury. It also carries oxygen, glucose, and other needed chemicals from the blood to the neuron. Okay, and neuroganglion. Okay, so a cerebral spinal fluid continues circulating through the cavities in the brain and the spinal cord, arachnoid, okay, the brain, okay, and the spinal cord, okay, in the subarachnoid space between the. So in short, what they're trying to explain is cerebral spinal fluid, the way it is flowing. Okay, so we're going to talk about even more in details as we go ahead. So what are some of the functions of cerebral spinal fluid? So cerebral spinal fluid, it supports and protects the brain and the spinal cord. It maintains a uniform pressure around these delicate organs. Okay, it acts as a cushion and shock absorber between the brain and the cranial bones. Okay, so it protects the brain and the spinal cords, or let's say it keeps the brain and the spinal cord moisture, and they may interchange substances between the cerebral spinal fluid and the brain, okay, such as providing nutrients and removing waste products. Okay, so production of cerebral spinal fluid. So the site of production for cerebral spinal fluid is a choroid plexus, a network of capillaries in the walls of the ventricles. So the capillaries are covered with epidermal cells that form cerebral spinal fluid from the blood plasma by filtration and secretion. Okay, so because the epidermal cells are joined by a tight junctions materials entering the cerebral spinal fluid from the choroid arteries, so cannot link between the cells. So in short, cerebral spinal fluid, so that junction more like prevents a link between these two. Okay, the capillaries and the nerves. Okay, so it prevents that link. Okay, so instead they may pass through the epidermal cells. So these blood cerebral spinal fluid barrier prevents the substances from entering the cerebral spinal fluid, and also exclude others, protecting the brain and the spinal cord from potential harm and blood-borne substances. Okay, so in summary, production of cerebral spinal fluid is by two processes. Okay, which is filtration and secretion. It is produced in the choroid plexus. Okay, so in the choroid plexus there are a lot of channel of capillaries. Okay, so in those channel of capillaries we find some cells inside which we call the epidermal cells. So those epidermal cells are responsible for production of cerebral spinal fluids by two processes. Don't forget, filtration and excretion. If you forget everything, remember those two. Okay, yeah. So this is a diagram showing the flow of cerebral spinal fluid, which we're going to explain in very soon. Okay, which we're going to explain in very soon. Okay, so basically when we are looking into the flow of cerebral spinal fluid, we're looking at a very important topic. Okay, so let's explain what the flow of cerebral spinal fluid is. Okay, so before we explain, I need us to understand what this diagram is all about. Okay, so under this diagram I've got parts of the brain. Okay, so I've got the lateral ventricle just right there. Okay, where I find the choroid plexus. I've got the subarachnoid space. Okay, we have got the third ventricle, we have got the cerebral aqueduct, we have got the foramina in the roof of the fourth ventricle, we have got the fourth ventricle, and the other side there I've got the arachnoid plexus. I've got the superior sinus, the superior sagittal sinus, and just the other side again we also have the lateral ventricle. Okay, and we have the brain there. Okay, and some meninges which they didn't show right here. We're going to see it in the other diagram. Okay, so now let's talk about the flow of cerebral spinal fluid. So cerebral spinal fluid is synthesized in the lateral ventricle by the choroid plexus. It then flows to the third ventricle where it is drained into the foramina on the top of the fourth ventricle to reach the fourth ventricle. Okay, so it is then spread into the subarachnoid space where it flows where it flows is meant where its flow is maintained by mobility of hose of the subarachnoid space. Then it finally passes through the arachnoid villus and joins the general circulation. Okay, and joins the general circulation. So that's the flow of cerebral spinal fluid. Okay, so now let's look into this one. So let's say cerebral spinal fluid has been formed just on the lateral ventricles. Okay, just right. Okay, so just right in here. So cerebral spinal fluid has been formed. Okay, so after it is being formed, it will be emptied. It will be emptied. Okay, pardon me. Okay, so it will be emptied into the third ventricle. So from the third ventricle, it will be drained down. It will pass through the cerebral aqueduct, passing through the foramina in the roof of the fourth ventricle. Okay, so there it will go down into the fourth ventricle. From the fourth ventricle, it will seep into down to the spinal cord. Okay, so just on the cerebral aqueduct, just on the foramina in the roof of the fourth ventricle, some cerebral spinal fluid will seep into the subarachnoid space. Okay, passing through the brain, and some will go down to the meninges. As you can see, the arrows are showing there. Okay, so some will go up there to the arachnoid villus. So upon reaching the arachnoid villus, there will be drainage of cerebral spinal fluid, which will go into the general circulation as plasma. Okay, so that's the flow of cerebral spinal fluid. Okay, yeah. So down there we can also see the brain showing structures of the meninges. Okay, So when we look very closely in this diagram, okay, when we look very closely in this diagram, okay, so remember your diagram should have an outlined heading, your diagram should be in a frame. Those are the GNC principles. Okay, so the brain showing structures of the meninges. So one there I've got the skull bone, okay, so I've got the sagittal the superior sagittal venous sinus, okay, so I've got the felix cerebral, okay, so I've got the cerebrum, I've got two layers of the dura mater, I've got the arachnoid matter, I've got the subarachnoid matter, I've got the pi adherent to the brain, or the pi matter in short, okay. We have got the okay, so let's say I've got the pons there, I've got the cerebrum, I've got the medulla oblongata, okay. So this is the structure of the brain, and just down there I've got the spinal cord. So this is the structure of the brain showing the meninges, okay. So if they tell you to draw something that is looking like this, okay. So what are some of the functions of meninges? Okay, so meninges act as a cushion for the brain against the cranial bones, okay. So they act as a cushion, as a shock absorber, which helps to prevent damage to the brain tissue. Transportation of cerebral spinal fluid through the central nervous system. So after cerebral spinal fluid has been formed from the ventricles, it is transported through the central nervous system by the meninges in the subarachnoid space. Drainage of cerebral spinal fluid. Drainage of cerebral spinal fluid. So after transportation of cerebral spinal fluid, it is carried from the subarachnoid space to the arachnoid villus, where it is drained and joins the general circulation. Okay, so these are some of the functions of the meninges. Okay, so thank you very much and stay blessed.